The taste of stale motel coffee, bitter and thin, lingered on Jack Morgan's tongue even after he'd swilled it down with a practiced grimace. The sun, a pale, anemic orb, was only just beginning its climb over the distant, hazy mountains, but already its tentative light cut through the grimy window of room 12 at the Desert Echo Inn. Dust motes danced in the weak beams, highlighting the ancient mustard-yellow floral pattern of the curtains and the stained industrial carpet that felt damp beneath his bare feet. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of pine cleaner, cheap air freshener, and a distinct metallic tang, like old pennies left too long in a pocket, hung in the air, a familiar aroma that had become the unofficial perfume of his solitary existence. Jack sat on the edge of the queen-sized bed, its mattress a landscape of worn springs and valleys, and methodically began his day. His muscles, honed and taut from years of unforgiving discipline, felt like coiled springs, always ready to unbind. Sleep was a shallow, restless thing, punctuated by phantom screams and the metallic tang of memory. He'd learned to live on its fringes, catching brief snatches of oblivion before the world, and his internal demons dragged him back to the surface. He was a creature of habit, and in his line of work, habits were a shield, a ritual against the encroaching chaos. First, the blade. He drew it from its sheath, the dark steel glinting dully in the low light. It was a fixed blade knife, not fancy, but utterly reliable. The edge was a razor, capable of splitting a single strand of hair, a testament to his obsessive care. He ran the pad of his thumb along it, a whisper-light touch, feeling the cold precision of the metal, a chilling promise. This was not merely a tool, it was an extension of his will, a silent partner in the grim ballet he performed. The weight of it in his hand was comforting, familiar, an anchor in the shifting tides of his reality. Next, the ammunition. He checked the magazines for his sidearm, each cartridge a perfect brass-jacketed cylinder, gleaming dully. They clicked into place with satisfying, definitive sounds, their collective weight a tangible promise of swift, brutal action. Each loaded magazine represented a handful of chances, a few breaths saved, a few more heartbeats granted. He loaded them, feeling the familiar heft, the cold, smooth brass against his fingertips. The world outside, beyond the peeling paint of the motel room and the distant hum of the highway, still remained ordinary, mundane, a stage for the everyday dramas of human life. But for Jack, the veneer of normalcy was thin, stretched taut over a simmering anticipation, a low, thrumming dread that had become his constant companion. He knew what waited beneath. He always knew. He reached for the battered, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth from countless openings and closings, its pages filled with his cramped, precise script. It was more than a logbook. It was his confessional, his burden, a silent witness to the horrors he faced. He uncapped his pen, the cheap ballpoint scratching faintly as he documented his observations, his sparse clues, his grim tallies. His hand, so accustomed to the trigger guard of a rifle or the smooth grip of a blade, now moved with careful deliberation, giving form and meaning to the chaotic, unspeakable things he was tasked with destroying. Each entry was a fragment of truth, chipped away from the monstrous lie that permeated the shadows of this country. "If I do not return," he had scrawled on the first page months ago, "let this account be the truth of those who hide among us." He rarely revisited that first declaration, but its weight was always present, a stone in his gut. Through the thin walls, he heard the mundane symphony of a motel waking up, A toilet flushed next door. A television clicked on. Muted voices murmured behind the opposing wall. Outside, the tires of a semi-trailer hissed on the asphalt of the main road, heading east, followed by the mournful, distant wail of its air horn. Ordinary sounds, filtering through the cheap construction, but to Jack's ears, honed by years of war and an even longer engagement with the unnatural, they were interspersed with something else. A subtle, almost imperceptible silence in the pauses. A breath held too long, as the world itself listened, waiting. His senses, sharpened to a painful degree, picked up the faintest dissonances, the slightest wrongness that pierced the mundane. It was like hearing a flat note in a perfectly tuned orchestra. Once you heard it, you could not unhear it. Then, a scent. Not the motel's stale, recycled air, not the faint waft of exhaust from the highway. This was distinct, carried on the dry desert air, mingling with the scent of sun-baked dust and gasoline. It was a subtle sweetness, cloying like old dried blood, accompanied by that faint metallic tang on his tongue that he'd noticed earlier, only stronger now. It was not a smell of immediate danger. It was a trail, a whisper from the direction of the rising sun. A hint. He knew this scent. He knew what it meant. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones precisely where it was calling him. East. Always east. He caught his reflection in the cheap, slightly wavy mirror above the dresser. A tired face, etched with lines that revealed too many sleepless nights and too many grim mornings. Eyes the color of steel, heavy-lidded but unnervingly alert, held too many memories, too much seen. Each scar, a road map of past battles, each weary glance, the price of knowledge. He was a rationalist to his core, a man who dealt in facts and evidence, yet an escalating unease and primordial anxiety tightened its grip on his chest. It was not a gut feeling, not anymore. It was a deeper, more profound knowing, born of repeated, impossible encounters. Jack finished his coffee, wiped the last of the sleep from his eyes, and sealed the journal. His mission, his penance, awaited. He secured his gear, the familiar weight of his chosen tools a reassurance against the growing chill of the unknown. The air conditioning unit in the wall rattled, a useless effort against the desert heat that soon baked the land. Slamming the door of room 12 behind him, the sound echoing hollowly in the quiet corridor, Jack walked toward his weathered sport utility vehicle. The engine rumbled to life, a low guttural growl, and the tires crunched on the gravel of the parking lot. Ahead stretched the featureless highway, a ribbon of black asphalt disappearing into the shimmering heat haze beneath a sun that brought a merciless day. But somewhere out there, hidden among the endless expanse of sand and sun-scorched scrub, something waited. Something tore apart the carefully constructed edifice of his world, piece by agonizing piece. His first destination. And he was ready. He was as ready as any man could be for the impossible. The abandoned roadside motel, its faded, half-missing letters on the pylon sign proclaimed it the oasis, shimmered on the distant Arizona horizon like a heat mirage. Its outline was bleached, sun-scorched, and ragged with neglect, a husk of a building beaten into submission by years of relentless desert sun and wind. The neon sign, a relic of a forgotten era, no longer glowed, its twisted tubes fractured like the bones of some ancient fossilized creature. The stucco facade was a canvas of cracks, webbed across its surface like the wrinkles on a cadaver's face, each line telling a story of decay and abandonment. The air, heavy and hot, did not stir. It pressed down, thick with the scent of heated plastic, stale dust, and something else, something cloying and unsettling like old decaying fruit left too long in the sun. The temperature gauge in Jack's sport utility vehicle had pegged at 105 degrees Fahrenheit an hour ago, and had only climbed since. As Jack stepped out of the air-conditioned vehicle, the heat hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. The muted howl of the wind, carrying fine grains of sand, was the only sound that broke the profound, unnatural silence. There was no rustle of a desert snake, no chirping of cicadas, not even the buzzing of a fly around the dumpster, overflowing with desiccated trash near the back. This emptiness was deafening, pressing in on his eardrums, a suffocating vacuum that screamed of wrongness. It was not just the absence of noise, it was the active negation of it, a void that had swallowed any whisper of life. Jack felt the fine hairs on the back of his neck prickle, a primal alarm bell ringing deep within him. He moved methodically, scanning the perimeter, his eyes missing nothing. He found the remnants of a semi-trailer, scorched and stripped, lying on its side 100 yards off the service road. Scattered around it were discarded tires, shredded and sun-baked, and torn fragments of a trucker's denim jacket, faded to near white. Everything looked as though life had simply ceased here, mid-stride, a sudden, inexplicable halt. But the details did not align. It was too neat, too staged. Beneath a thin layer of fine dust, he saw them. Fresh tracks, much too large for any human, distinct and deep, leading from the ruined trailer towards the motel's main entrance. They were not paw prints, they were footprints, but elongated, broader, with an unnatural splay to the toes, pressed by something heavier, more powerful than an ordinary man. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down his spine, despite the oppressive heat. He approached the motel's main entrance, the glass in the double doors long since shattered, leaving jagged teeth in the frames. Stepping inside, Jack was enveloped by an air so stale it pressed down on his lungs, thick with the smell of moldering carpet, ancient mattresses, and that sweet, sickly rotten odor, a disturbing reminder of meat left out too long. The semi-darkness of the corridor leading to a series of empty rooms sharpened his senses to a painful degree. He heard only the deliberate crunch of his own boots on the scattered debris and the relentless echoing thud of his own heart. Each beat reverberated off the crumbling walls, a drum marking time in a dead place. He moved from room to room, his hand never straying far from the grip of his sidearm. The silence remained, a constant, oppressive companion. Then, in one of the deeper rooms, barely perceptible in the perpetual gloom, he saw them. Shadows, shifting, coalescing. A low, guttural growl, rough as grinding stones, escaped the gloom. Jack did not hesitate. He acted, his movements fluid and precise, a lethal dance honed through countless similar encounters. The air instantly filled with the stench of their particular musk, a rank, primal odor that turned his stomach. A swift, brutal engagement, the sickening thud of his blade finding flesh. Blood, hot and metallic, sprayed across the grimy wall, its acrid tang filling his mouth, merging with the bitter coffee taste. He cut one of them down, a desperate, feral snarl tearing through his own throat. This was not a moment of animalistic terror, but of calculated, targeted fury. He was the hunter, and this was the kill. He finished his grim work, leaving a trail of twitching, rapidly changing forms. Only then did he feel a strange, cold compulsion pulling him further into the motel's forgotten depths. He found a specific room at the very end of the corridor, one into which no ray of sunlight penetrated. The door was off its hinges, a darker void beyond. Stepping inside, he felt the air drop by at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit, a chill that had nothing to do with the desert heat. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with thousands of names, scratched into the plaster, carved with crude tools or drawn in dried, flaking blood. Mary, Tom, Sarah, David, Chloe, Alex. It was not just a list of victims. It was a meticulous, chilling tally. Trophies, accounted for with terrifying precision. A grim ledger of lives consumed. Jack ran his fingers across the rough, crumbling plaster, feeling the cold weight of countless lost souls. An archive of human sorrow. The silence that followed the cleanup was even more oppressive, a heavy blanket that smothered any lingering breath of life. These things, these creatures, they kept count. Better than any state police department, better than any coroner. They did not just hunt, they documented. This chilling, methodical approach, this bureaucratic precision in their barbarity, pierced Jack to the core. It sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across his arms, a stark contrast to the oven-like heat of the desert outside. The very idea that these monsters, these savage things, had the cognitive capacity for such meticulous record-keeping twisted something deep within him. It demonstrated a level of intelligence, a depraved order, that was far more terrifying than simple bestial hunger. His hand, still slick with their blood, reached for his journal. He scrawled a single damning line. They remember, and they are methodical. The heat no longer bothered him. He was utterly cold. The world shattered into a cacophony of sound as Jack drove from the hushed, sun-blasted silence of the desert into the roaring heart of a city that never slept. The shift was brutal, a cold shower of sensation. The gentle whisper of sand-laden wind gave way to the relentless, churning hum of traffic, the blaring horns, the distant wail of sirens, and the indistinguishable guttural murmur of millions of lives lived in close proximity. The clean, dry scent of dust and ozone was replaced by a harsh, aggressive cocktail of exhaust fumes, stale sweat, damp concrete, and the acrid tang of garbage baking in the afternoon sun. This immediate, jarring contrast hit him like a physical blow. But beneath the overwhelming surface noise, Jack's sharpened senses picked up a familiar, thin, almost ethereal trace. A scent that had no place here, yet belonged. His destination lay beneath the city's churning surface, in the forgotten arteries of its subway system. The descent into the subway was a plunge into another world entirely, a subterranean realm governed by its own rules of light and shadow, sound and silence. The air grew immediately heavier, thick with the metallic scent of ozone, the acrid bite of rust, and the damp, earthy smell of ancient, waterlogged concrete. A chilling cold, a full 20 degrees Fahrenheit lower than the street level, seeped into his bones, carrying with it the pervasive odor of damp, decaying leaves trapped somewhere in the endless tunnels. The metallic screech of trains arriving and departing, the mournful, high-pitched whine of the ventilation system, and the lonely, rhythmic drip of water from unseen leaks in the ceiling created a disquieting symphony. Here, the darkness was not merely the absence of light. It was an active, oppressive presence, a heavy shroud that swallowed him whole. He moved through the crowded platforms, a mere shadow among the living, his eyes constantly scanning, his senses on high alert. He saw their tracks, subtle but unmistakable, weaving through the human traffic. Not merely human shoe prints, but something else. Broad, bare imprints, too large, too splayed, left by powerful, predatory feet that dragged slightly, leaving faint, almost translucent streaks in the grime. These tracks led away from the public areas, into the shadowy labyrinths of abandoned service tunnels, places the ordinary commuters never saw. Piles of discarded newspapers, gnawed-on food wrappers, and torn fragments of homeless encampments, all signs of recent presence, but overlaid with that distinct, musky animal scent, intensified now, merging with the pervasive metallic tang that had followed him from the desert. The hair on his arms stood on end. Deep within the narrow, echoing passages, where the beam of his tactical flashlight snatched fleeting glimpses of rusted pipes and crumbling brickwork, Jack found them. Not one, but many. Shadows detached themselves from the deeper gloom, coalescing into forms that were too large, too angular to be merely human. Their eyes, glowing with a baleful, ominous orange light, pierced the darkness, fixing on him with an unnerving intensity. It was an entire pack, a coordinated unit, utilizing the heavy shadows and the deceptive acoustics of the tunnels as their hunting ground. They moved with a disturbing synchronization, a fluid, silent grace that belied their size, flowing together like a single, malevolent entity. The battle erupted in the suffocating confines of the tunnel. The initial guttural snarl of one of the creatures was instantly swallowed by the metallic shriek of steel on concrete as Jack drew his blade. He moved, a blur of practiced violence, striking at the nearest threat. His knife sliced, tore, and rent flesh, but the creatures swarmed, attacking from all sides, a tidal wave of muscle and fang. Blood, thick and coppery, sprayed onto his face, mingling with the sweat that poured down his temples, stinging his eyes. His lungs burned, gasping for the heavy, oxygen-thin air, the taste of iron in his mouth becoming an almost unbearable constant. He blocked a savage lunge, pivoting, his elbow slamming into a heavy chest, eliciting a sound that was half grunt, half wheeze. These were not mere animals. They were strong, faster than any man, and they fought with a terrifying, unified purpose. He dispatched the last of them, the heavy thud of its falling body echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Jack stood panting, his hand white-knuckled around the hilt of his blade, his chest heaving. He forced himself to examine the bodies, rapidly reverting to their baseline, unsettling human forms. He noted the placement of their wounds, the way they had moved as a unit, their coordinated attack patterns. These were not just beasts. They were skilled tacticians, adapting to the urban labyrinth, transforming it into their own dark, sprawling forest. Every movement had been calculated, every flanking maneuver executed with a chilling precision. They had known where he would go, anticipated his responses. They understood strategy. Finally, he ascended, breaking free of the subterranean gloom and into the muted glow of the city at night. A cold sweat, not from exertion but from a deeper fear, still streamed down his back despite the lingering warmth of the evening. The city lights, once a comforting blanket, now appeared too harsh, too bright, illuminating a world he no longer fully trusted. The sounds, once a shield, were now a constant, nagging reminder of hidden dangers. He looked at the faces of the passers-by, anonymous and absorbed in their own lives, and in each one he now saw something unsettling, something hidden, a monster lurking just beneath the skin. They were everywhere, and they were smart. This thought, chilling and persistent, clung to him like a shroud, a haunting refrain as he found a quiet corner and scribbled into his journal. The city is their new wild. Humanity, their blind neighbors. The golden fields of the Great Plains, stretching endlessly under the broad, bruised sky, shimmered with an almost otherworldly beauty. They swayed and rippled under a gentle breeze, a living ocean of wheat and corn that whispered secrets to itself. In the heart of this vast agricultural tapestry, nestled amidst the amber waves, stood a lone farmhouse, its white paint peeling, flanked by a massive, weathered barn and a silent, rusting silo. It was the quintessential picture of American pastoral idyll, a scene plucked from a bygone era of quiet, hard work and community. The scent of freshly cut hay and rich, fecund earth was a balm to Jack's road-weary soul, a sensory anchor in a world grown increasingly strange. Instead, his hyper-alert nose picked up a subtle, insidious note woven into the fabric of these wholesome smells. A faint, almost imperceptible tang of something spoiled, something rotting, an undercurrent of slow, creeping decomposition. The silence here was not the oppressive, unnatural vacuum of the desert motel, nor the deafening chaos of the city's underground. It was a quieter, more insidious kind of silence. No dogs barked in the distance. No sheep bleated in a nearby pasture. No cows lowed from behind a fence. There was no cheerful clatter of farm machinery. No distant roar of an all-terrain vehicle. Nothing. This anomalous quiet pressed in, heavy and suffocating like a thick woolen blanket. The farm, an island surrounded by the whispering field, was a pocket of suspended animation, a place where life had simply, inexplicably, been put on pause. The dry earth, baked hard by the sun, crunched softly under Jack's boots as he approached the farmhouse, and the sound felt monstrously loud in the profound stillness. He tried the front door. Unlocked. Of course. Inside, the house was immaculate, almost disturbingly so. A half-eaten breakfast, cold pancakes and syrup, congealed eggs, remained on the kitchen table, as if the occupants had simply stepped out for a moment and were due to return at any second. A children's coloring book lay open on the living room floor, crayons scattered next to it. But there was no dust, no sign of recent play. Everything was too perfectly preserved, too obviously arranged. This was not the aftermath of a sudden, recent disappearance. It was a meticulously staged tableau, a carefully constructed illusion where every object was precisely in its place. But the very soul of the home had long since departed. It was like walking into a dollhouse where the dolls had been meticulously posed by a disturbed child. Then he found them, not human. They were gathered in the small, sun-drenched dining room, arrayed around a table set with mismatched plates and glasses, frozen in the poses of a family enjoying a meal. One sat at the head, a father figure, hands clasped, head slightly bowed. A mother opposite, a benign smile on her face. Two smaller forms, children, perched awkwardly on booster seats. From them emanated the faint yet distinct odor of stale fabric, mingled with that unmistakable, barely perceptible smell of decay he had sensed outside. It was faint, almost camouflaged by the artificial freshness of the staged room, but it was there. And when he moved closer, their heads, with an unnerving slowness, turned in unison towards him. Their eyes, too dark, too deep, too knowing, fixed on his. No human eyes held such emptiness, such ancient calculation. The fight was instantaneous and savage. The illusion shattered with a horrifying violence. Furniture splintered. Cheap plates and glasses flew from the table, shattering on the linoleum floor, their shards crunching underfoot. The guttural snarls and hoarse cries of the creatures mingled with the dull thud of blows. Jack worked with a chilling efficiency, his blade a blur, entering and exiting flesh, leaving wet, crimson streaks on the pristine walls. He saw not just rage in their eyes, but something else, something akin to a desperate, possessive ferocity. They were defending their new home, their carefully constructed lie. He moved, driven by a cold, righteous fury, a dance of death amidst the domestic wreckage. Each time his blade found its mark, their form began to shift, the human facade dissolving into something more primal, more monstrous, only to revert again as their life ebbed. Leaving the carnage of the dining room, his boots squelching on the ruined carpet, Jack was drawn to the barn, an enormous looming structure that cast a long shadow across the yard. Inside, the usual farm smells, hay, manure, damp earth were present, but they were overlaid, almost overwhelmed, by a different, deeper odor. The true nightmare awaited him there. Hanging from the sturdy wooden rafters, meticulously spaced, were the bodies of the real family. A man, a woman, 2 small children. Eviscerated, their entrails removed, their skin dried and shriveled by a chilling unknown process, faces contorted in silent, eternal screams of horror, their eyes staring into the dim, dusty void. This was not just a simple act of murder. It was an exhibition, a gruesome display of dominance, a cruel, perverse performance. It was a declaration. Jack emerged from the barn, his clothes soaked with blood, his face streaked with sweat and grime, the cloying smell of the farm clinging to him like a shroud. The silence, which had been merely anomalous before, was now not just the absence of sound. It was the echoing scream of unspeakable terror, a cry stuck in the throat of the world. He felt his own heart clench, a cold, hard knot in his chest. These things, these mimic monsters, did not just hide, they replaced. They did not just kill, they usurped. The sheer, audacious horror of it settled deep within him. His hand, shaking slightly, reached for his journal once more, the leather feeling slick against his fingers. He scrawled a single damning line. Their mask is so perfect it erases any difference. The idyllic landscape now mocked him, its beauty a cruel, deceptive lie. The majestic peaks of the western mountains, ancient and immutable, rose sharply against the cerulean sky, their upper reaches still capped with streaks of stubborn, late-season snow. Dense, dark green coniferous forests clung to their slopes, an unbroken blanket of pine and spruce stretching as far as the eye could see. The air here was thin, crisp, and cool, carrying the invigorating scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the distant metallic tang of melting snow. Normally, a place like this, with its raw, untamed beauty, cleansed the mind, offering solace in its sheer indifference to human concerns. But Jack felt none of that. Instead, a heavy, sticky dread permeated the air, a pervasive anxiety that clung to him like burrs. As the very sky frowned, its usual blue now tinged with an unseen, oppressive gray. He had tracked them for 2 days, following faint, almost ethereal signs of passage through the rugged wilderness. Finally, nestled in a secluded valley, he found the remnants of a tourist campsite. It was a scene of suspended animation, frozen in time. Discarded backpacks lay half open near overturned tents. A cast-iron skillet sat askew on a fire pit filled with cold, dead ashes, around which lay a scatter of crumpled beverage cans. But there were no signs of a struggle. No overturned picnic tables, no ripped fabric, no broken branches, no blood. Just an absolute deafening emptiness. as the campers had simply vanished into thin air, plucked from existence by an unseen, silent hand. The lack of any obvious chaos was, in itself, a chilling testament to the efficiency and terror of the horrific events that occurred here. As Jack moved through the silent camp, his hunter's eyes deciphered the subtle language of the forest floor. He found tracks, not the haphazard, chaotic prints of wild animals, but something else entirely, purposeful, deliberate. A series of expertly pruned branches, a section of trampled grass forming a distinct, almost invisible path leading away from the camp, revealed a carefully planned ambush route. They had used the trails, the natural contours of the land, with the cunning and precision of highly trained guerrillas. They had not just attacked, they had maneuvered. A cold knot tightened in Jack's throat. These were not mere predators driven by instinct. They were soldiers operating with a disturbing, cold intelligence. The forest around him, instead of providing the usual serene rustle, groaned and sighed, whispered and creaked with unseen tension. The rustle of pine needles under a sudden gust of wind, the sharp crack of a distant dry branch falling. Each sound served as a prelude, a harbinger of something dark and ancient stirring in the depths. Jack felt the unsettling sensation of being watched, of countless invisible eyes tracking his every move. He, the hunter, had suddenly become the prey in this elaborate, deadly game. The air itself vibrated with their presence, a low, barely perceptible hum beneath the sounds of nature. The first rustle, slight and almost imperceptible, was followed by a second, closer, then a third, just behind him. They were surrounding him, moving with an eerie, almost preternatural silence, their forms melting into the dappled light and shadow of the pines. Jack caught fleeting glimpses of their movements, a quick, almost imperceptible exchange of glances, a subtle nod, a silent hand signal. Instinct did not guide them, it was coordination, communication. He saw it now with a horrifying clarity. They had a leader, a command structure. They had a plan. This was an organized, intelligent hunting party, far more dangerous than anything he had encountered before. Jack lashed out, his movements precise, deadly, a practiced flurry of blade and fist. The engagement was swift, brutal, and utterly devastating. The creatures, stronger than any human, moved with a terrifying speed and ferocity, their claws and teeth seeking to tear him apart. He fought back, his own roars mingling with their guttural snarls, his knife finding flesh with sickening efficiency. He felt the tear of fabric, the sting of a claw, but he pressed on, driven by the cold fury that now defined him. The battle was brief, but its consequences were profound. As he delivered a killing blow to one of them, their eyes, flickering between bestial rage and a chilling, analytical awareness, held not just raw violence but strategic calculation itself. They were not just learning, they were evolving. They were tactical hunters. One of the creatures, a particularly agile one, managed to slip away into the deeper shadows of the forest, melting into the ancient pines before Jack stopped it. He stood alone in the center of the ravaged camp, breathing heavily, the mountain air now feeling even colder, biting at his exposed skin. He looked down at the blood-stained earth, at the rapidly reverting forms, and understood the terrifying truth. His enemies were not merely animals nor simple monsters. They were something far more perilous. They were growing. They were adapting. They were learning from every encounter, from every mistake. They are evolving, he thought, the words echoing in his mind like a death knell. And I am their teacher. His trembling hand reached for the journal, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. He scrawled a single, stark line, their mind. That is their most terrifying weapon. The silence of the mountains, once so comforting, now mocked him, holding the echo of his own terrified realization. The entrance to the old mine, a gaping maw in the earth, was a jagged wound in the Montana landscape. It was surrounded by the skeletal remains of rusted machinery. Derelict winches, collapsed ore carts, twisted lengths of rail, all monuments to a forgotten industry and long-abandoned dreams. The sky overhead was a low, oppressive leaden gray that threatened rain, pressing down with a tangible weight, mirroring the heavy dread that had settled in Jack's gut. The air around the mine opening was thick, carrying the cloying scent of cold, damp rock, decades of accumulated moisture, and something else. An elusive, profoundly heavy metallic odor, like the lingering exhalation of some ancient, dead titan. It smelled like death itself had taken up residence here, burrowing deep into the earth. As Jack approached, he noticed them. Not a full-blown assault, no immediate charge. A small group of the creatures, 4 or 5, moved with an unsettling purposefulness around the mine's perimeter. They were not aggressive. They were patrolling, guarding the entrance with an almost military discipline. Their movements were measured, deliberate, imbued with a strange, focused concentration, a purpose that extended beyond mere survival or opportunistic hunting. Jack felt a cold prickle on his skin. This was not a lair in the conventional sense. It was a stronghold. He knew he was nearing something significant, something that transcended the brutality of previous encounters. This was different. This was organized. He made his descent into the mine, the absolute darkness of the shaft, swallowing the powerful beam of his flashlight, reducing it to a mere pinprick of defiant light against an overwhelming void. The rough-hewn walls were slick with black mold and condensation, their surfaces glistening eerily. Isolated drops of water fell from unseen crevices, hitting the pooling water below with rhythmic, hollow echoes, each sound amplified in the cavernous gloom. The stench of metal, rust, and slow decay became suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides. The air was cold, heavy and still, like the last labored breath of a giant long dead. He pushed deeper. The weight of the earth above him a tangible presence. Jack navigated the labyrinthine network of narrow adits and crumbling passages, past abandoned ore carts half submerged in stagnant water, their wheels frozen in time. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every faint scuttle of unseen vermin, every tiny splash of water was amplified, distorted, stretched into a monstrous echo in the profound silence. He felt an undeniable, unseen presence all around him, a chilling awareness of being watched from the oppressive shadows. Yet the creatures did not attack. They merely observed, their silent scrutiny a palpable force, guiding him deeper, drawing him further into their dark domain. It felt like a perverse, macabre theater, with him as the reluctant, unwitting star. Finally, in the deepest chamber, a vast, echoing cavern where not even the faintest whisper of daylight penetrated, he found it. Not gold, not ore. Far worse. Dozens, hundreds of human bones were stacked in neat, almost symmetrical piles. Femurs carefully aligned with femurs, ribs woven together, skulls arranged in rows, their empty eye sockets staring into the perpetual blackness. It was not a random dumping ground, not the chaotic leavings of a feast. It was an ordered graveyard, a meticulously arranged charnel house, an altar built of human remains. The sheer, chilling tidiness of it was what truly twisted his gut. This was not just a feeding ground or a hiding place. It was something far greater, far more sinister. He questioned their purpose. Was it a ritual? A marker? A message? The precision, the sheer volume, demonstrated a coordinated effort, a methodical building. A cold, clammy sweat beaded on Jack's forehead despite the chill. This activity, this gruesome construction, had a structured purpose, a chilling rationality that defied the primal savagery he usually encountered. It was a dark, unspoken language written in bone and blood. Jack retraced his steps, exiting the deepest chamber, his flashlight beam slicing through the oppressive darkness, catching fleeting glimpses of grotesque shadows that recoiled from the light. He annihilated the few remaining creatures guarding the entrance, dispatching them with a grim, practiced efficiency. But he felt no victory. The images of the neatly stacked bones were seared into his mind, an indelible brand. They were building something vast, something that transcended simple predation. And this, he knew with a sickening certainty, was only the beginning. His hand, shaking now with an unfamiliar tremor, reached for his journal. "They have a purpose," he scrawled, the words feeling ancient and heavy, as old as this earth itself. "I feel it in my bones." The vast, silent mind breathed around him, exhaling the unspoken threat. The suburban community in Ohio was a picture postcard of the American dream, rendered in a palette of meticulous greens and pastels. White picket fences, freshly painted and perfectly aligned, delineated manicured lawns that shimmered with an almost artificial emerald hue. Flower beds bursting with riotous blooms of petunias and marigolds lined the perfectly swept sidewalks. The air, thick and humid from a recent afternoon shower, was fragrant with the intoxicating scent of freshly cut grass, mingled with the faint, mouth-watering aroma of grilling meat from a distant backyard barbecue. On the surface, it was an ideal, untouched slice of Americana. But as Jack drove his sport utility vehicle slowly down Elm Street, a name generic as the houses themselves, he felt a thin, almost imperceptible tremor beneath this flawless surface, a subtle, underlying falseness that vibrated with a quiet menace. He parked his car several blocks away and began his walk, an unwelcome mere shadow in this cheerful tableau. Neighbors, watering their impatience or retrieving mail, offered him polite, bland smiles and faint waves. Their faces were uniformly pleasant, their eyes holding a bland benevolence. Yet something flickered within them, a fleeting alien glint that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He passed children, bright and boisterous, playing with a deflated soccer ball in a pristine yard. Their laughter sounded just a little too shrill, too forced, too perfect. Every detail in this place was too flawless, too meticulously maintained, too devoid of the natural imperfections and random chaos of authentic life. Something in the very air hummed with an unsettling artificiality, a world meticulously constructed and sustained for purposes unknown. Jack chose a house at random, its cheerful yellow paint and trim geraniums indistinguishable from a dozen others. He picked the lock with practiced ease, his movements silent, efficient. Inside, the house was a carefully curated testament to ordinary life. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece showed a smiling family on a beach vacation. A half-read paperback lay on a nightstand in the master bedroom. Children's crayon drawings, a stick-figure family, a wonky yellow sun, were affixed to the refrigerator with magnets. The scent of a recent home-cooked meal, of meatloaf or roast chicken, still lingered, battling with the sterile aroma of lemon-scented household cleaner. It was all a perfect, infuriating camouflage, a painstakingly crafted illusion designed to lull, to deceive. The sheer effort of it made Jack's stomach churn. He found them in the living room, arrayed in the postures of typical suburban evening life. The father sat in a plush armchair, reading a newspaper, his brow furrowed in concentration. The mother sat on the sofa, knitting needles clicking softly, a half-finished sweater pooling in her lap. Two children sat on the floor, playing a board game, their heads bent in feigned engagement. Their movements were just a fraction too mechanical, their gazes a hint too vacant, their poses too ideal, too staged. They were mimicking life, enacting a tableau of domestic bliss, and Jack felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat at the sheer unnatural spectacle. The smell of decay, faint but present, still clung to them, a sickly counterpoint to the lemon-fresh air. The illusion shattered in an instant. Jack did not speak. He simply drew his weapon, a silent statement. The transformation from human to monster was swift and horrifying, unfolding directly before his eyes. There in the heart of the living room, amidst the throw pillows and framed family photos. Fabric ripped as muscles swelled and bones elongated. Furniture groaned and splintered under the sudden violent shifts in mass. A torrent of blood, hot and viscous, erupted onto the pristine, cream-colored carpet. The air filled with their guttural snarls, their feral screeches, mixed with the sickening sounds of their bodies tearing themselves apart to reassemble into something monstrous. Jack was not just fighting. He was tearing at the very fabric of their lie, ripping away the carefully maintained normalcy to expose the raw, hideous truth beneath. After the brutal, visceral fight, Jack stood amidst the ruins of their carefully constructed false life. The living room was a shambles, soaked in blood and reeking of their particular musk. He stood there, panting, his body aching, and understood. These things, these monsters, lived side by side with humans for months, even years, utterly undetected. No one suspected them. They were not just predators, they were parasites, perfectly integrating themselves into human society, wearing human faces, speaking human words. The insidious infection of this country, he realized with a cold, shattering certainty, was far deeper, far more pervasive than he had ever dared to imagine. Jack exited the house, leaving the door ajar, the acrid scent of their blood mingling with the perfume of blooming roses. His gaze drifted across the street to the other perfectly manicured lawns, the other impeccably painted houses. Each one was a potential nest, a hidden den of these mimetic horrors. The world he had sworn to protect, the bedrock of his understanding, was rotten from the inside out, hollowed out by an unseen enemy. How many of them, how many such families were there, living their false lives in plain sight? This thought, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, pierced him to the bone, twisting his gut. His hand, still trembling slightly, reached for his journal. "The invisible threat is far more terrifying than the obvious," he scrawled, the words almost illegible in his haste. "It is already among us, and we are blind." After the visceral cleanup of the suburban home, The silence that descended upon Jack was not merely an absence of noise, but a suffocating internal state. It was heavier than any physical burden, more profound than any vacuum. The world outside, the comforting rhythm of everyday life now, was utterly alien, a deceptive stage for an unseen horror that continued to unfold beneath its thin veneer. The familiar urban hum and the distant chirping of crickets were just background static, irrelevant noise beneath the profound, chilling reality he now carried within him. He returned to his makeshift sanctuary, a rented room in a nondescript motor lodge miles away, and spread his journal on the scarred tabletop. Each page, each hasty scrawl, each meticulous observation began to weave itself into a tapestry of chilling, interconnected truths. The organized patrols at the mine, the meticulous record-keeping at the desert motel, the strategic ambush in the mountains, the perfect mimicry of the Suburban family, the bone altar. It was not a series of isolated incidents. It was a pattern. Organization, adaptation, imitation, ritual. This was not chaotic, instinct-driven predation. It was part of a larger, incomprehensible plan, a grand design that made his blood run cold. His hands, calloused and scarred, trembled slightly as he added new lines to the grim ledger, the pen scratching a nervous rhythm against the paper. In the dead of night, lying on the too-soft mattress, Jack closed his eyes, and the phantoms came. He saw their faces. The terrified, blank stares of the victims, the fleeting, almost human expressions of the monsters as he cut them down, and his own face, reflected in the dull sheen of his blade, each time looking a little more like the very things he hunted. The boundaries between hunter and hunted, between man and beast, had thinned to an almost transparent membrane, blurring and dissolving until all that remained was a sticky, pervasive emptiness, a void where his own humanity used to reside. He felt himself changing, hardening, becoming something else, something grim and uncompromising. As he reread his entries, new details previously dismissed as insignificant began to scream for attention. Subtle, repeated symbols on the walls in the Montana mine, almost identical to crude, scratched marks he'd seen on a doorframe at the desert motel. Small, almost invisible, glyphs carved into the bark of pines near the mountain camp. A primitive yet undeniably meaningful system of communication. They were not just acting in concert, they were communicating, coordinating across vast distances, across different landscapes. A network. A silent, deadly web stretching across the country. The world around Jack was slowly, inexorably twisting, morphing into something sinister. Ordinary things, the lengthening shadow in an alleyway, the fleeting, unreadable glance of a stranger in a gas station, the sudden, inexplicable creak of the floorboards in an old house, now carried a distinct undertone of menace, a subtle hint of the hidden, the waiting. His once unshakable rationalism, the scientific approach he applied to everything, was fracturing, cracking under the relentless pressure of the impossible. It was giving way to something far more primal, a deep-seated atavistic fear that clawed at the edges of his sanity. He was losing his grip, and he knew it. An internal voice, one he had always tried to suppress with logic and reason, now screamed. It was not a voice of madness, but of raw, instinctual knowing, a sixth sense honed to a razor's edge. It told him, with a chilling certainty, that all these disparate threads, all these gruesome encounters, were leading to one central place, one focal point, the very epicenter of everything. It was not just another fight, another bloody engagement. It was an unveiling, a final horrifying revelation that tore down whatever fragile illusions he still clung to. He was being drawn, like a moth to a flame, towards the source. Jack began the methodical process of assembling his gear. His movements, usually fluid and practiced, were now sharper, more clipped, imbued with a desperate urgency. His eyes, already too deep and weary, sank further into their sockets, burning with a feverish intensity. He felt like a cornered animal, driven by an instinct beyond reason, heading towards its final desperate stand. The air conditioning unit in the motel room hummed, a small, mundane sound against the roar building in his ears. He grabbed his pen, the metal cold against his trembling fingers, and added a final grim entry to the journal before he closed it, before he locked it away. I feel them. They feel me. This game is nearing its end, and I am ready for the final confrontation. He went to the 7th place, to the precipice. The relentless Nevada sun, a brassy, merciless eye, and a bleached-out sky beat down on the abandoned military base. Its unforgiving light bounced off the faded concrete of decaying barracks and the rust-pocked metal of crumbling hangars, creating an oppressive, shimmering heat haze that distorted the distant horizon. Here, amidst the skeletal remnants of Cold War fears, in a landscape that echoed with the mere shadows of forgotten anxieties, Jack felt the very air vibrate with a tangible, hidden tension, a low hum of residual malevolence that spoke of a foreign, bestial life force that took root. The temperature was a searing 115 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of heat that made the asphalt soft underfoot and blurred the vision. The architecture of this place was a testament to human paranoia, a brutalist landscape of despair. Dilapidated hangars yawned open to the elements, their corrugated roofs ripped like tin foil. Empty, lightless bunkers, their reinforced doors hanging askew, offered silent invitations to darkness. Ruined watchtowers, their observation slits like dead eyes, stood sentinel over nothing. All of it, the crumbling concrete, the rusted rebar, the peeling lead paint, was a grim testament to human-made fear, now inherited by something far older, far more primal. The pervasive scent of sun-baked dust, faded paint, and the lingering odor of decaying hope mingled with a subtle yet distinct aroma of the apex predator he now knew so well. It was the smell of something utterly alien superimposed on human desperation. He approached the perimeter cautiously, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. He soon found them, clear, almost invisible boundaries, patrolled with a terrifying, almost military discipline. This was no chaotic scramble of beasts. It was a carefully organized defense, a system of sentries moving with unsettling precision. On the dusty, alkali-laden ground, he saw a multitude of tracks, large, splayed prints, some heavier, some lighter, but all moving in unison, following precise, well-worn routes. This pack, this terrifying assembly, was not merely a group of predators. It was an army, organized and disciplined, occupying the ruins of human conflict. The silence here was not absolute, but rather a chilling, controlled quiet. In the distance, carried on the hot, dry wind, he heard the faint, unsettling scrape of metal on concrete, followed by dull, rhythmic thuds. A low, continuous rustling sound, like large bodies being dragged or shifted, permeated the air. These were not merely the sounds of decay or disuse. These were the sounds of activity, of construction, of a deliberate, ongoing effort. They were building something. They were preparing. This thought, colder than any desert night, pierced him like an ice pick, solidifying the dread in his gut. The scale of their ambition, their sheer audacity, was staggering. Jack found a vantage point, a partially collapsed water tower offering a decent, albeit precarious, overview of a central courtyard. He settled in, melting into the shadows cast by the setting sun, and began his observation. He saw them, more than a dozen of the creatures, moving with unsettling coordination, like highly trained elite soldiers. Their gestures, their low, guttural growls. These were not random animalistic sounds, but a language, a complex system of communication, understood only by them. His own extensive experience in military operations, his own history with special forces, screamed at him. He was confronting something unprecedented, something that mirrored human warfare in its terrifying efficiency. A cold, clammy sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temples. This was not just a den, it was a fortress, an operational base. This was not just a pack, it was a highly organized structure, complete with leaders, tactics, and terrifyingly, a discernible, long-term purpose. Jack felt his rational mind, the very foundation of his being, begin to falter, to stumble under the weight of this impossible reality. An ancient, primordial fear, one that transcended all his training and experience, clawed its way to the surface, seizing him in its icy grip. This was beyond anything he had anticipated. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that this entire setup was a trap, an elaborate, perfectly laid snare designed to draw him in. And he knew, just as certainly, that he walked directly into it. Not because he was obligated, not because he was foolhardy, but because it had become his only path. This base, this final, seventh location, was not merely the end of his journey. It was his point of no return. His hand, steady despite the internal turmoil, reached for his journal one last time. "They are waiting," he scrawled, the words stark against the fading light. "And I am going. This base is not just the end of the road, it is the point of no return." The abyss beckons. Jack moved through the ruins of the military base like a shadow, his movements silent, fluid, honed by years of walking the line between the seen and unseen. The air inside the crumbling facilities was heavy, thick with the pervasive scent of decades of accumulated dust, the acrid bite of rust, and that specific pungent musk of their presence, sharp, musky, and undercut by the unmistakable metallic tang of blood, both fresh and dried. Every deliberate step he took echoed not in the air, but in his own ears, a drumbeat of approaching confrontation. The sky outside had long since turned to the velvet black of night, studded with indifferent stars, offering no solace, no light for the darkness within. He had navigated the maze of derelict offices, empty storage rooms, and collapsed corridors for what felt like hours, relying on a combination of his sharpened senses and an almost preternatural instinct. Then, without warning, it erupted. From the oppressive darkness of a cavernous, long-abandoned hangar, they came. A furious, overwhelming attack, launched from all sides simultaneously. This was no wild, haphazard charge driven by raw instinct. This was a meticulously planned ambush, executed with chilling precision, designed for one purpose: to overwhelm and destroy. The air instantly filled with their guttural snarls, their high-pitched feral screeches, and the sickening thud of their bodies colliding with his own, with the unforgiving concrete walls. A low, resonant growl like the grinding of tectonic plates echoed through the vast space, deafening, disorienting, and utterly terrifying. Jack found himself at the epicenter of a bloody maelstrom. His tactical knife, an extension of his will, became a blur of motion, slicing through flesh and muscle. His pistol barked, each shot a sharp, definitive crack that punctuated the cacophony, dropping one of the creatures with a sickening wet thud. Every movement he made was the honed, brutal dance of a veteran, a man who had long ago shed any hesitation. But there were too many of them. They came in waves, a relentless tide of snarling teeth and rending claws. Blood, hot and viscous, sprayed onto his face, mingling with the sweat that poured down his temples, stinging his eyes, momentarily blinding him. It soaked his clothes, turning the fabric stiff and heavy. He tasted iron, felt the raw burn in his lungs. This was beyond mere combat. It was a fight for his very soul, a desperate scramble for survival against an enemy that understood strategy as well as savagery. In the chaotic frenzy of the battle, as he parried a savage lunge and plunged his blade into a chest cavity, Jack saw it. In their eyes, amidst the raging fury, there was something else, a flicker of cold, calculating intelligence, an echo of human reason, a strategic understanding of their movements and his. He himself moved like a predator, a thing of pure, lethal efficiency, his body slick with their blood, his throat constricting with a raw, guttural growl that felt disturbingly alien yet familiar. In that moment, the lines between him and the creatures he hunted blurred, almost disappeared. He was becoming one of them, a monster forged in the crucible of their own monstrousness. They retreated, only to attack again, a relentless cycle of lunge and parry, forcing him deeper and deeper into the heart of the base, into a maze of ever-darkening corridors. The continuous pressure, the unrelenting assault, made every cell in his body scream. His muscles burned, his head pounded, and each ragged breath was a searing pain. The taste of metal in his mouth became a constant, suffocating companion. He was a machine, running on pure adrenaline and the primal will to survive. But even machines had their limits. He felt his own breaking point approaching, a dark precipice just beyond the next turn. At one point, as he savagely brought his blade down, severing a limb, and then plunged it deep into another's chest, a cold, alien voice cut through the roar of his own blood in his ears. "You are doing the same thing we are doing." The thought, icy and venomous, momentarily poisoned his consciousness, a chilling whisper of doubt that unraveled him. But the relentless demands of the fight, the immediate threat to his life, forced it back, buried it beneath the instinct for survival. There was no time for introspection, not now. Not yet. He broke through their ranks, leaving a gruesome trail of dead and dying forms behind him. But there was no triumph, no surge of victory. Only an exhausting, bone-deep weariness and the cold certainty that something far more terrible awaited him. His path led him deeper, into the very heart of the crumbling fortress, towards the central command bunker. The true horror, the central phantom, awaited him there. His hand, slick with gore, fumbled for his journal, finding the leather almost comforting. "Victory is merely the continuation of the battle," he scrawled, his words blurred by sweat and blood. "And my soul grows more distant with every strike." Jack burst into the central command bunker, the heavy, reinforced door groaning on its rusted hinges as he forced it open. Here, within this concrete sarcophagus, an unnerving, deafening silence reigned, a profound quiet that stood in stark, terrifying contrast to the recent visceral carnage he had left in his wake. The pervasive stench of blood and gunpowder was stronger here, almost palpable, clinging to the air, seeping into every pore, every fiber of his being. And in the very center of the vast, echoing chamber, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of emergency lights, stood the leader creature. Its form was larger, more imposing than any he had encountered, its posture more upright, more deliberate. Its eyes, even from a distance, held a chilling ancient intelligence, far exceeding the mere predatory cunning of the others. Their gazes locked across the desolate expanse of the bunker. In the leader creature's eyes, there was no trace of the frenzied, bestial savagery he had grown accustomed to. Instead, he met a cold, ancient rationality, a profound shrewdness that pierced through Jack, stripping him bare, laying his very soul open. Jack felt his gut clench, a cold, hard knot of pure terror forming in his stomach. This was not merely a powerful creature. This was an old, potent intelligence, a force that predated human history, and its gaze carried the weight of millennia. Then, the unimaginable. The leader creature shifted its weight, a slow, deliberate movement, not aggressive, but a gesture. And then, words. Clean, articulate English, spoken in a voice that was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of anything but an ancient, terrifying clarity. It was a sound that tore at the very fabric of Jack's reality, a discordant note in the symphony of his meticulously constructed world. "You think that we are monsters?" the leader creature rumbled, its voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "But the true monsters are those who hunt their own kind." The words struck Jack with the force of tons of collapsing concrete. They did not just hit him. They ripped his entire worldview to shreds, tearing it apart piece by agonizing piece. Hunt their own kind. Who were his own? Who were the monsters? The lines, which had been blurring for so long, now vanished entirely, leaving only a chaotic, terrifying void. His mind, accustomed to the rigid structure of logic, of clear distinctions between good and evil, hunter and hunted, shattered under the sheer weight of that phrase. He was not a monster. He was a guardian. And Jack? Jack was the executioner? The thought, poisoned and insidious, twisted his perception. He felt a profound, sickening vertigo as his purpose, his very being, unraveled. The leader creature, understanding the devastating impact its words had wrought, made its final move. The creature knew its utterance had inflicted far greater damage than any physical wound. With a final furious snarl born of an ancient rage, it lunged. Jack met it, his own movements now infused with a desperate, all-consuming frenzy, an unholy mixture of primal fury and existential despair. Blows exchanged, bone against bone, muscle against muscle. A raw, guttural roar ripped from Jack's throat, mingling with the leader creature's own enraged bellow. The sickening crack of splintering bone. And then the leader creature fell, collapsing with a heavy thud, blood gushing onto the cold concrete floor. Its eyes, slowly glazing over, were still fixed on Jack, still held that chilling, ancient intelligence, even as life faded from them. The leader creature was dead, but its words remained, echoing endlessly in the vast, silent bunker, searing themselves into every cell of Jack's consciousness. He had not merely killed an enemy, he had destroyed the very meaning of his existence. They are guardians. And he, who was he? This thought, venomous and irreversible, began to eat away at him from the inside, a corrosive acid dissolving his soul. Jack Morgan, a mere shadow of the man he once was, stumbled out of the shattered military base as the first tentative breath of dawn painted the eastern sky. The horizon was a canvas of nascent beauty, bleeding from soft rose into pale orange and a hopeful, tender gold. But this light, a herald of new beginnings, offered him no comfort, no solace. Instead, it merely illuminated the grotesque enormity of everything he had seen, everything he had done, everything he had become. The air, crisp and cool with the morning, carried the faint, lingering scent of gunpowder and blood, a permanent stain on the pristine desert. The wind, a gentle caress, whispered across his blood-streaked, dirt-smeared face. Yet he felt nothing but a profound internal coldness, an emptiness that gnawed at his core. All his strength, all his iron-willed resolve, had evaporated in the desolate bunker, leaving behind only a crushing desolation. Each step he took, away from the scene of his final, devastating victory, was an act of immense physical agony, each breath a searing burn in his abused lungs. His body screamed in protest, but the pain was distant, secondary to the deeper, far more insidious wound that festered within his soul. He found a shard of glass from a broken vehicle window, glinting in the pale, rising sun. He caught his reflection in its distorted surface, a stranger's face, hollowed eyes that held the dead, flat stare of an ancient, defeated creature. His skin was caked with dried blood and grime, his hair matted. In that fractured image, Jack saw no hero, no righteous hunter. He saw a beast, utterly indistinguishable from those he had pursued and brutally dispatched. A monster, mirroring the very things he had sworn to destroy, their essence now indelibly imprinted upon his own. The long drive back through the waking desert stretched before him, an endless ribbon of asphalt leading nowhere. The world outside, the vast, empty landscape, blurred into a meaningless succession of images. His hands, gripping the steering wheel, felt nothing of the cold metal. His gaze, fixed on the distant, shimmering horizon, was utterly vacant. He drove by instinct, his body moving through the familiar motions. But he no longer knew where he was going, or why. The compass of his soul was shattered. He found himself, by an unconscious, grim compulsion, back at the motor lodge, in the very same room. Room 12. The air still held the faint, metallic scent. His journal lay open on the cheap laminate tabletop, waiting. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, reached for the pen. Each letter, each carefully formed word, was not an effort of thought, but a raw, agonizing moan, a guttural sound torn from the deepest recesses of his being. He wrote, not thinking of style or form, only of the desperate, overwhelming need to externalize the horror, to purge it from his ravaged mind. The words spilled onto the page, raw and unadorned, like blood from an open wound. I am a hunter, but the longer I kill them, the clearer it becomes. They grow more like us, and I, less and less distinguishable from the beast. The ink bled, spreading slightly, obscuring the precise lines. A single tear, cold and sharp, traced a path through the grime on his cheek, mixing with the drying ink on the page, a solitary testament to a broken man. The journal lay closed on the table. The mission, his 7 cursed places, his final confrontation, all were done. The external war was over. But Jack sat, staring into the impenetrable emptiness of his future, his eyes dead, mirroring the hollow shell of a man he had become. The sun had risen fully, bathing the room in a harsh, unforgiving light. It was morning, but for him, the light did not return. The hunt was finished, but his own transformation, his horrifying apotheosis, was complete. He had lost his humanity, piece by agonizing piece, amidst the blood and the deceit. He was now, irrevocably, one of them.